I was holding a champagne flute in one hand and a scrub brush in the other when my entire world flipped upside down. The crystal stemware wasn't for me to drink from. It was for me to wash after Patricia's precious anniversary guests finished, toasting her 40 years of marriage. But in that moment, when Carmen Rodriguez walked through those mahogany doors and locked eyes with me, everything I thought I knew about power, respect, and family was about to change forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alexandra, but everyone calls me Alex, and I need you to understand something about humiliation. It doesn't arrive like a storm with thunder and warning. It creeps in quietly, disguised as tradition, wrapped in smiles, and delivered by people who claim they love you. For 3 years, I'd been married to Jordan, and for 3 years, I'd been slowly disappearing into the role his family had carved out for me. Not daughter-in-law, not equal, servant. The evening started like every other family gathering at the Riverside Heights mansion on Maple Street. Patricia had been planning this anniversary celebration for months, turning it into what she called the social event of the season. 40 years of marriage to Robert deserved nothing less than perfection, she'd announced at every opportunity. The guest list read like a who's who of Springfield's elite: doctors, lawyers, business owners, city council members. Everyone who mattered in our little corner of the world would be there to witness the golden couple's milestone. I'd spent the entire week leading up to the party running errands. Not because I wanted to help, but because Patricia had a way of making requests that weren't really requests. "Alex, darling, would you mind picking up the flowers? The caterer is being absolutely impossible about delivery times." Or, "Sweetie, I need someone trustworthy to handle the wine selection. You have such practical taste." Practical. That was Patricia's favorite word for me. It sounded like a compliment until you realized it meant boring, predictable, useful. Jordan never seemed to notice how his mother's requests multiplied whenever I was around. He'd grown up in this house where Patricia orchestrated every detail of their lives with the precision of a symphony conductor, and to him, it was just how things worked. His sister, Michelle, got to be the princess, flitting in and out with her latest boyfriend du jour. His brother Kevin got to be the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. And I got to be the one who made sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. The morning of the anniversary party, I arrived at the mansion at 8 o'clock sharp. Patricia had called the night before with what she termed a tiny favor. The cleaning service she'd hired had supposedly canceled at the last minute, some nonsense about a scheduling conflict, and she needed someone reliable to handle the final preparations. "You're so good at these things, Alex. Much better than those professional services anyway. They never pay attention to detail like family does." I'd wanted to say no. God, how I'd wanted to say no. But Jordan had already left for his golf game with his father and the groomsmen from our wedding, and Patricia's voice had that edge to it, the one that suggested disappointment would have consequences. So I'd packed my cleaning supplies, put on my oldest clothes, and driven across town to spend my Saturday making sure everything gleamed for people who'd never notice my effort. The house was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. The caterers were setting up in the kitchen, their white uniforms crisp and professional. The florist was arranging enormous bouquets of white roses and baby's breath throughout the main floor. A team of servers was polishing glasses and arranging them on silver trays. Everyone had a role, everyone had a purpose, and somehow I was the only one with a mop in my hands. Patricia appeared in the foyer wearing a silk robe and a face mask, her hair wrapped in curlers. She looked like she was preparing for a magazine shoot rather than hosting a party. "Oh, good. You're here. I was starting to worry." She handed me a laminated list that was 3 pages long. "I've organized everything by priority. The powder room on the main floor needs special attention. You know how Judge Morrison is about cleanliness, and the chandelier in the dining room has some spots that are simply unacceptable. I stared at the list, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't helping with last-minute details. This was comprehensive housework. Patricia, I thought you said the cleaning service canceled? Her laugh was light and dismissive. Well, they did. But honestly, Alex, you know this house better than any stranger would. You'll do such a better job than some random person who doesn't understand our standards. She patted my shoulder with the kind of affection you'd show a loyal pet. Besides, family helps family. That's what marriage means. Marriage. The word sat heavy in the air between us. I'd married Jordan, not his entire family, but somehow the lines had gotten blurred over the years. Somehow helping had become expecting, and expecting had become demanding, and demanding had become just the way things were. The first few hours passed in a blur of scrubbing and polishing. I cleaned baseboards that were already clean, washed windows that sparkled, and reorganized closets that no guest would ever see. The caterers worked around me, professional and efficient, never once asking me to move out of their way because they could see I belonged in a different category. They were paid help. I was just help. Michelle arrived around noon, floating through the front door in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She air-kissed Patricia and squealed about how gorgeous everything looked, then settled into the sunroom with a mimosa to supervise the flower arrangements. When she spotted me on my hands and knees scrubbing the marble entryway, she called out cheerfully, "Oh, Alex, you're such a saint. I could never do what you're doing. I'd break a nail in the first 5 minutes." Saint. Another word that sounded like praise but felt like a cage. Kevin showed up an hour later with his latest girlfriend, a woman named Tiffany who wore too much perfume and spoke in a voice that could shatter crystal. They sprawled across the living room furniture, feet up on the coffee table I'd just polished, while Kevin regaled everyone with stories about his latest business venture. Some app idea that was going to revolutionize something or other. Patricia hung on his every word like he was announcing the cure for cancer, even though Kevin had been revolutionizing various industries unsuccessfully for the past 5 years. "Alex!" Patricia's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Could you come here for a moment?" I found her standing next to the caterers, gesturing toward a pile of serving dishes that gleamed like mirrors. "These need to be hand-dried. The caterers are wonderful, but they don't understand that water spots are absolutely unacceptable for tonight." One of the caterers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked embarrassed. "Ma'am, we'd be happy to—" No, Patricia waved. Her off. "Alex has a special touch with these things. Family knows how important tonight is." Family. The word was starting to make my skin crawl. I spent the next hour hand-drying dishes that would be dirty again within minutes of the party, starting, while Patricia fluttered around giving directions to everyone else. The servers, the bartenders, the musicians who'd arrived to set up in the garden, everyone got polite requests and grateful thank yous. I got orders and expectations. By 4 o'clock, the transformation was complete. The house looked like something out of a magazine spread. Every surface gleamed, every flower was perfectly arranged, every piece of crystal caught the light just so. The garden had been turned into an elegant outdoor dining space with twinkling lights and flowing fabric draped between the trees. It was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, and I'd played a significant role in making it happen. But when I looked, in the mirror of the powder room I'd scrubbed until my hands were raw, the person staring back at me looked like the help. My clothes were stained with cleaning solutions, my hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under my eyes from exhaustion. I looked exactly like what I'd become, hired help who didn't get paid. "Alex," Patricia's voice echoed through the house again. "The guests will be arriving soon. You should probably head home and get ready." Get ready, as if I were invited. As if I weren't Jordan's wife, but some distant acquaintance who might warrant a pity invitation. I found Patricia in her bedroom, where a team of stylists was putting the finishing touches on her hair and makeup. She looked radiant, every inch, the queen of her domain. "Thank you so much for today, sweetie. You're absolutely wonderful. Jordan is so lucky to have someone so practical." There was that word again. Practical. Code for useful, reliable, forgettable. "Patricia," I said carefully, "what time should Jordan and I arrive tonight?" She paused in the middle of fastening a diamond earring, her reflection meeting my eyes in the vanity mirror. "Oh, Alex, I thought Jordan told you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tonight is really more for our longtime friends and family. Very intimate, you understand. Just the people who've been part of our journey from the beginning. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 12 hours making sure this party was perfect, and I wasn't even invited to attend it. I was good enough to scrub their floors, but not good enough to sit at their table. "But I'm family too," I said quietly. Patricia's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course you are, darling. But family understands when space is limited. You understand, don't you?" I understood perfectly. I understood that 3 years of marriage meant nothing if you weren't born into the right bloodline. I understood that all my efforts to fit in, to be helpful, to be the daughter-in-law they wanted, had been interpreted as confirmation that I knew my place. And my place was in the kitchen, not at the table. I drove home to our apartment in Oak Valley feeling something I'd never experienced before, a kind of rage that was cold and sharp and calculating. Not the hot anger that makes you scream and throw things, but the kind that makes you think clearly for the first time in years. I sat in my car outside our building, still wearing my cleaning clothes, still smelling like lemon furniture polish, and I made a decision. I was going to that party. Not because I was invited, not because I belonged, but because I had something to prove, even if I didn't know exactly what it was yet. I showered, washed the smell of servitude out of my hair, and put on the most elegant dress I owned, a black cocktail dress Jordan had bought me for his company Christmas party. I did my makeup carefully, pinned my hair up in an elegant chignon, and chose jewelry Pierce had given me for our 2nd anniversary. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see hired help anymore. I saw Jordan's wife. I saw a woman who belonged at that party whether she was wanted or not. The drive back to Riverside Heights felt like crossing enemy territory. Every familiar landmark reminded me of errands I'd run, favors I'd done, ways I'd made myself useful to people who saw usefulness as my only value. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't going as Patricia's helper or Jordan's accommodating wife. I was going as myself, whoever that turned out to be. The mansion was ablaze with light when I pulled into the circular driveway. Valet attendants were parking cars while elegantly dressed guests made their way up the front steps. Through the windows, I could see the party in full swing, people laughing, glasses clinking, the kind of sophisticated gathering I'd helped orchestrate but never been allowed to enjoy. I handed my keys to the valet, who looked surprised to see me but professionally composed. The front door was propped open, and I could hear the sound of conversation and music flowing from inside. My heart was hammering as I walked up those steps, the same steps where I'd scrubbed gum off the concrete that morning. The foyer was packed with guests, all of them looking exactly like the kind of people Patricia wanted to impress. Successful, polished, important. I recognized several faces from the society pages of the local newspaper, people whose names were associated with charity galas and country club memberships and expensive cars. And there, near the base of the staircase I'd vacuumed 12 hours earlier, stood Jordan with his parents and siblings, playing the role of the perfect family. Patricia was holding court, regaling a group of admiring women with some story that had them all laughing appreciatively. Robert was by the bar, deep in conversation with Judge Morrison about golf handicaps. Michelle was posing for photos with Tiffany, both of them glowing with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong. Jordan spotted me first. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked uncomfortably like embarrassment. He excused himself from the group and made his way over to me, his smile tight and strained. "Alex," he said, keeping his voice low, "what are you doing here?" The question felt like a slap. What was I doing there? I was attending my in-laws' anniversary party. I was being Jordan's wife in public instead of just in private. I was refusing to accept that my place was in the utility room instead of the dining room. "I'm here for the party," I said simply. But Mom said, "Your mother said a lot of things today, Jordan. But she didn't say I wasn't welcome in your family." Before he could respond, Patricia appeared at his shoulder like she'd materialized out of thin air. Her smile was brilliant and sharp as a blade. "Alex, what a lovely surprise. I didn't expect to see you tonight." "I wouldn't miss celebrating your special milestone," I replied, matching her tone exactly. Something flickered across Patricia's face, gone too quickly to identify, but not quickly enough to miss entirely. "Well, of course, dear. Though I hope you understand that we've already finalized the seating arrangements." "I'm sure we'll figure something out," I said smoothly. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front door. A woman in an elegant navy blue suit was speaking with one of the servers, her voice carrying just enough for us to overhear. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic from downtown was absolutely terrible." Patricia's attention shifted immediately, her hostess instincts kicking in. "Oh, that must be Carmen Rodriguez. She owns that cleaning service downtown, Elite Home Solutions. Robert insisted we invite her. Something about her being an important businesswoman in the community." My blood froze in my veins. Carmen Rodriguez, Elite Home Solutions. The cleaning service that had supposedly canceled at the last minute, leaving me to spend my entire day scrubbing floors like Cinderella. Patricia glided over to greet her newest guest, all charm and gracious hospitality. "Ms. Rodriguez, how wonderful that you could make it. I was so disappointed when your service couldn't accommodate us today. But I completely understand how busy successful businesses can be." Carmen Rodriguez was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that missed nothing. She shook Patricia's hand with the kind of confidence that comes from building something from nothing and making it successful. "I'm sorry," Carmen said, her voice carrying a slight accent and a lot of authority. "I think there's been some confusion. Elite Home Solutions never had any booking with you, Mrs. Patterson. We would never cancel on such short notice, and frankly, we're booked solid for the next 3 months. Our reputation depends on reliability." The color drained from Patricia's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Around us, the conversation had died as nearby guests turned to listen to this unexpected exchange. But surely there must be some mistake," Patricia stammered. "I specifically called your company last week." "Ma'am," Carmen's voice was patient but firm, "I personally handle all bookings for events of this caliber. We have no record of any communication with you or anyone in your household." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Patricia's mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to explain why she'd lied about the cleaning service canceling. But there was no good explanation because the truth was simple and ugly. She'd lied to manipulate me into spending my day as unpaid household help. That's when Carmen's eyes found mine across the crowd, and something extraordinary happened. Her professional expression shifted, her eyes widening with recognition, and something that looked suspiciously like delight. "Alexandra?" she called, out, her voice cutting through the awkward silence. "Alexandra Martinez?" Every head in the foyer turned toward me. Patricia looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Jordan's mouth fell open. Even Michelle and Kevin stopped their posing to stare. Carmen was making her way through the crowd toward me, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "I can't believe it. What are you doing here?" The room was dead silent, waiting for my response. Patricia's eyes were burning into me, probably trying to figure out how I knew this successful businesswoman she'd been trying to impress. Jordan looked confused and slightly panicked. And me? For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. "Hello, Carmen," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's wonderful to see you." Carmen reached me and, to everyone's surprise, pulled me into a warm hug. "It's been, 2 years since we last spoke? You look fantastic." 2 years. Since before my marriage. Back when I was still Alexandra Martinez instead of Alexandra Patterson. Back when I had my own identity instead of being an extension of Jordan's family. "I had no idea you'd be here tonight," I said, which was absolutely true. Carmen stepped back, still holding my hands, her eyes sparkling with an emotion I couldn't quite read. "Well, this is certainly a small world. Patricia?" She turned to address my mother-in-law, who was standing frozen beside us. "Do you know what a remarkable woman you have in your family?" Patricia's smile was so forced it looked painful. "Of course Alex is. Very special to us." "Special doesn't begin to cover it," Carmen said, her voice growing stronger. "Alexandra here isn't just special. She's brilliant and successful, and apparently much too modest because she hasn't mentioned the most important thing about herself." The crowd was hanging on every word now. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes focused on us, waiting to hear what Carmen would reveal. Even I was holding my breath because I had no idea where this was leading. Carmen turned back to me, her expression mixing pride and something that looked like vindication. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the room, "I'd like you to meet Alexandra Martinez, the owner and founder of Elite Home Solutions." The words hit the room like a bomb. The silence that followed Carmen's announcement was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Every face in that foyer was frozen in various stages of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Patricia looked like she'd been turned to stone, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. Jordan's eyes were darting between Carmen and me like he was watching a tennis match he couldn't understand. Michelle had actually dropped her phone, the metallic clatter echoing off the marble floors I'd spent the morning scrubbing. But it was Robert's voice that broke the silence, cutting through the tension with the bluntness that had made him successful in commercial real estate. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Carmen's smile widened, and I could see she was enjoying this moment immensely. "I said that Alexandra here is the owner of Elite Home Solutions, has been for 8 years now, built it from the ground up into one of the most successful cleaning and property management companies in the tri-state area." The words hung in the air like incense, spreading through the crowd and settling into every corner of the room. I watched as understanding dawned on face after face. Judge Morrison, who Patricia had been so concerned about impressing, was staring at me with new interest. Dr. Whitfield, the cardiologist who lived 3 streets over, had raised his eyebrows in genuine surprise. Even the servers had stopped moving, caught up in the drama unfolding in front of them. Patricia found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. That's impossible. Alex doesn't own a business. She works in marketing for some small firm downtown." "Actually," I said, speaking for the first time since Carmen's revelation, "I work in marketing for my own firm. Elite Home Solutions provides comprehensive property management and cleaning services for residential and commercial clients throughout Springfield and the surrounding counties." The truth felt strange on my tongue after years of downplaying. My achievements, of letting Jordan's family believe I was just another corporate drone grateful for their acceptance. For 3 years, I'd allowed them to see only the version of myself that made them comfortable. The accommodating wife, the helpful daughter-in-law, the woman who was practical enough to clean their house, but not important enough to sit at their table. Carmen squeezed my hand, her voice warm with pride. Don't be so modest, Alexandra. Elite Home Solutions isn't just successful. It's exceptional. You employ over 60 people now, don't you? And wasn't it last year that you won the Springfield Chamber of Commerce Small Business Excellence Award? The award. I'd been so proud when I received that recognition, but when I'd tried to share the news with Jordan's family, Patricia had changed the subject to Michelle's latest modeling audition. The moment had passed so quickly I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't important, that I'd been silly to think they'd care about some local business award. 63 employees as of last month, I corrected softly, and then felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Pure, unapologetic pride in what I'd built, what I'd accomplished, what I'd created with my own hands and mind, and determination. Kevin, who had been silent through this entire exchange, suddenly laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Come on, this is ridiculous. Alex cleans houses. She was literally here today scrubbing our floors. The words were meant to diminish me, to reduce me back to the role they'd assigned me. But instead, they hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw several guests exchange glances. Dr. Whitfield's wife, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, spoke up from near the dining room entrance. Did you say she was cleaning your house today? Alexandra Martinez, who owns Elite Home Solutions, was personally cleaning your house? Patricia's face had gone from pale to a splotchy red. Well, she offered to help with some last-minute preparations when our cleaning service canceled. But Ms. Rodriguez just said her company never had a booking with you, Judge Morrison interjected, his legal mind clearly putting the pieces together. Which means either there was another cleaning service that canceled or… He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Patricia had lied about the cleaning service canceling, which meant she'd deliberately manipulated me into spending my day doing manual labor under false pretenses. Carmen's grip on my hand tightened, and when I looked at her, I saw something fierce and protective in her eyes. Alexandra, are you telling me that these people, your husband's family, asked you to clean their house today instead of hiring professionals? The question was simple, but the answer felt complicated. How do you explain years of small manipulations, of requests that weren't really requests, of being slowly molded into a role that diminished everything you were? How do you describe the process of losing yourself one practical comment at a time? They needed help, I said finally, though the words felt hollow even to me. Help, Carmen repeated, her voice taking on an edge I remembered from our business. Meetings years ago when contractors tried to shortchange her. Help from a woman who runs a 63-person company. Help from someone who could have sent a professional crew and had this entire house spotless in 2 hours. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, do you understand what you're looking at here? Alexandra Martinez doesn't just own a cleaning company. She's revolutionized the industry in this region. Her employees receive full benefits, profit sharing, and continuing education opportunities. She's been featured in Entrepreneur magazine twice. Her company has a 6-month waiting list because demand for their services is so high. With each word, I felt something inside me straightening, unfurling like a plant that had been kept in darkness too long. This was who I was. This was what I'd accomplished. Not the diminished version of myself I'd become in this house, but the real Alexandra Martinez, who'd started with a borrowed vacuum cleaner and a business plan scribbled on napkins. Michelle, who had been staring at me like I was a stranger, finally found her voice. But why didn't you ever tell us any of this? The question hit me like a physical blow because the answer was so simple and so painful. I tried to. Remember, when I won the Chamber of Commerce award? Or when the Springfield Business Journal did that feature article about women entrepreneurs? Or when I hired my 50th employee and wanted to celebrate? The memories came flooding back, dozens of moments when I'd attempted to share my professional life with Jordan's family, only to be met with polite disinterest or immediate topic changes. They'd trained me to believe that my achievements were less important than Michelle's latest headshots or Kevin's newest get-rich-quick scheme. Jordan stepped forward, his face pale and confused. Alex, I don't understand. You never said you owned the company. You always said you worked in marketing. I do work in marketing, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I market my own company. I handle client relations, strategic planning, and business development for Elite Home Solutions. The company I founded, the company I built, the company I own. The weight of those words, company I own, settled over the room like a revelation. I owned something. I employed people. I made decisions that affected dozens of families, hundreds of clients, thousands of transactions. I wasn't just Jordan's wife or Patricia's daughter-in-law. I was Alexandra Martinez, CEO. Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, extending his hand with the kind of respect I hadn't seen from anyone in Jordan's circle before. Ms. Martinez, I believe your company handles the property management for the medical complex where my practice is located. Your team does exceptional work. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand and feeling the simple dignity of being recognized for my professional accomplishments. That's our downtown commercial division. They take great pride in maintaining professional environments. Ms. Martinez, Judge Morrison's wife spoke up. Didn't your company handle the cleanup after that terrible flood at the courthouse last spring? I remember hearing the county administrator praising your emergency response team. We did, I confirmed. Emergency restoration is one of our specialized services. We had crews working around the clock for 2 weeks to ensure the courthouse could reopen as quickly as possible. More voices joined in, people sharing their own experiences with my company, praising the professionalism of my employees, expressing surprise and delight at making this connection. It was surreal, standing in Patricia's foyer and finally being seen for who I really was by people who had never looked past the role I'd been assigned in this family. Patricia stood frozen in the center of it all, watching her carefully orchestrated social event slip completely out of her control. The elegant anniversary party she'd planned had become an impromptu networking session, celebrating a daughter-in-law she'd spent 3 years treating like hired help. Carmen leaned closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. I hope you know how extraordinary this is, what you've built. And I hope you also know that you should never, ever be cleaning anyone's house with your own hands unless you choose to. The emphasis on choose hit me like lightning. Choice. When was the last time I'd felt like I had a choice in how I spent my time, my energy, my Saturdays? When was the last time someone had asked what I wanted instead of assuming what I would do? Robert, who had been unusually quiet during this entire exchange, suddenly cleared his throat. Well, he said in the booming voice he used for important pronouncements, this certainly puts things in a different perspective. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel, but Robert continued anyway. Alexandra, I had no idea we were dealing with such an accomplished businesswoman. Elite Home Solutions has quite a reputation in the commercial real estate sector. Very impressive. The validation from Robert, who'd barely acknowledged my existence for 3 years, should have felt good. Instead, it highlighted everything that was wrong with this situation. I was the same person I'd been that morning when I'd arrived with cleaning supplies. I'd accomplished the same things, built the same company, employed the same people. The only thing that had changed was their knowledge of my success. I'd been worthy of respect for 8 years. They just hadn't bothered to look. Jordan was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which in many ways, he was. Alex, why didn't you tell me? About the company, about how successful you are. The question was so innocuous, so genuinely confused, that it broke something inside. Me, Jordan, I said quietly. I've been telling you for 3 years. You just weren't listening. The truth of that statement echoed through the suddenly quiet foyer. I had been telling him. Every time I'd mentioned a difficult client or a challenging employee situation. Every time I'd talked about business strategies or expansion plans. Every time I'd tried to share the stress and joy and complexity of running a growing company. He'd heard the words, but he'd never understood that I was talking about my company, my decisions, my responsibility. He'd somehow convinced himself that I was middle management at someone else's business, despite never meeting my supposed boss, never attending company events, never questioning why I worked such flexible hours or traveled so frequently for marketing meetings. Carmen, who had been watching this family drama unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing a train wreck, suddenly straightened. You know what, Alexandra? I think this calls for a proper celebration. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding respect in male-dominated industries. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we're not just celebrating Robert and Patricia's anniversary tonight. We're also celebrating one of Springfield's most successful entrepreneurs, who apparently has been hiding her light under a bushel. The crowd murmured approval, and I saw heads nodding, people raising their glasses. Someone started to clap, and within seconds, the entire foyer was filled with applause. Not polite social applause, but genuine appreciation for achievement. I stood there in my black cocktail dress, the same dress I'd worn to Jordan's company parties where I'd been, introduced as Jordan's wife, and felt the strange sensation of being seen. Really seen, not as someone's wife or daughter-in-law or helper, but as myself. Patricia's voice cut through the applause like a knife. Well, this is all very interesting, but perhaps we should move to the dining room. Dinner is being served. It was a desperate attempt to regain control of her own party, to redirect attention away from the uncomfortable revelations that had just unfolded. But Carmen wasn't finished. Actually, Carmen said, her smile taking on a predatory edge, I'm quite curious about something. Alexandra, you mentioned that the family needed help today because their cleaning service canceled. But as the owner of Elite Home Solutions, surely you could have simply sent one of your crews to handle whatever needed to be done. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia's face went ashen, and I saw her grip tighten on her champagne glass. Jordan looked confused, still trying to piece together the implications of everything he'd learned. It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of the manipulation I'd endured. Of course I could have sent a crew. I could have had Patricia's house cleaned by professionals in a fraction of the time it had taken me to do it, myself. I could have supervised the work from a distance while handling other business. I could have maintained my dignity and my professional status while still helping with the family emergency. If there had actually been a family emergency? You're absolutely right, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I could have sent a crew. In fact, I should have sent a crew. That's what business owners do. We delegate operational tasks to our trained employees while we focus on strategic decisions. I looked directly at Patricia, who was now clutching her pearls like a lifeline. But I was told this was a family emergency. I was told the cleaning service had canceled at the last minute, and there was no time to find alternatives. I was told that family helps family, and that my help was needed urgently. The implications of what I was saying rippled through the crowd. Several people looked shocked, others angry. Judge Morrison's wife actually gasped audibly. Carmen nodded slowly, her expression fierce with protective anger. So you're telling me that instead of utilizing your professional resources, the company you built, the employees you trained, the systems you developed. You spent your day personally scrubbing floors because you were led to believe it was an emergency? That's exactly what I'm telling you. The words came out clear and strong, and with them came a rush of clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about cleaning floors or anniversary parties or family obligations. This was about respect. This was about being valued for who I was instead of what I could do. This was about the difference between being loved and being useful. Doctor. Whitfield spoke up from across the room, his voice carrying professional authority. Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what you're describing sounds less like family helping family and more like professional exploitation. Professional exploitation. The clinical term for what I'd been experiencing made it sound serious, legitimate, worthy of attention. Not just family dynamics or personality conflicts, but actual professional exploitation of someone with real skills and real value. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out higher-pitched than usual. Now that's really quite an exaggeration. Alex is family. We would never exploit family. Wouldn't you? The question came from Margaret Whitfield, and her tone was ice-cold. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you convinced a successful business owner to provide free manual labor by lying about the circumstances and playing on family loyalty. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while Robert shifted uncomfortably beside her. Even Michelle and Kevin had gone quiet, apparently realizing that this situation had spiraled far beyond their ability to charm their way out of it. Jordan stepped closer to me, his voice low and urgent. Alex, can we talk privately? I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Has there been? I asked, not moving away from him but not moving closer either. What exactly do you think has been misunderstood? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing, but now saw as a sign of his discomfort with conflict. I don't understand why you never told me about your company, about how successful you are, about any of this. Jordan, I said gently, because despite everything, I still loved him. I did tell you. The problem isn't that I didn't share my life with you. The problem is that you didn't hear me when I did. Carmen, who had been listening to our exchange with obvious interest, suddenly cleared her throat. If I may, she said, addressing the room but looking directly at Patricia, I'd like to share something that might provide some context for this situation. Patricia's eyes widened with something that looked suspiciously like panic. I really don't think that's necessary. Oh, but I think it is, Carmen continued smoothly. You see, Alexandra and I have known each other for many years, long before her marriage. And I remember quite clearly the last time we spoke in detail about her personal life. She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests before landing back on me. It was about 2 years ago, at the Springfield Business Association's annual gala. Alexandra had just signed a major contract with the city for emergency response services, and we were discussing the challenges of work-life balance for women entrepreneurs. I remembered that conversation, though I hadn't thought about it in months. Carmen and I had sat at a corner table during the cocktail hour, sharing war stories about building businesses in a male-dominated industry. Alexandra mentioned that she was struggling with her husband's family's perception of her work, Carmen continued. She said they seemed to think she had some sort of middle management job and couldn't understand why she traveled so much or worked such irregular hours. The memory came rushing back. The frustration I'd felt trying to explain to Carmen why Jordan's family didn't seem to understand or appreciate my professional life. How Patricia had made comments about my flexible schedule, and Jordan's father had suggested I might want to consider a more stable career path. I remember asking her why she didn't just tell them the truth about her success, Carmen went on. And she said something that stuck with me. She said she'd tried, but that Every time she mentioned her achievements, they found ways to minimize them or change the subject. She said she was starting to feel like they preferred the version of her that was available to help with family obligations. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing with perfect accuracy. That conversation had been a turning point. For me, the moment I'd realized that my professional success wasn't just being overlooked by Jordan's family, it was being actively dismissed. Patricia's face had gone from red to purple, and her voice was barely controlled when she spoke. That's a very one-sided interpretation of family dynamics. Is it? Carmen's voice was sharp now, all pretense of politeness gone. Because from where I sit, it looks like a pattern of deliberately keeping a successful woman in a diminished role for the convenience of others. Judge Morrison, who had been listening with the intense focus he probably brought to complicated legal cases, suddenly spoke up. Ms. Rodriguez raises an interesting point about patterns of behavior. Ms. Martinez, may I ask how often you've been asked to provide free services for family events? The question caught me off guard, partly because I'd never really counted, and partly because the answer was embarrassing. Well, there have been several occasions. Several? Carmen prompted gently. I thought back over the past 3 years, mentally cataloging the requests that had seemed reasonable at the time, but now felt like something else entirely. Michelle's graduation party last year, Kevin's housewarming party, the family Christmas gathering, Robert's birthday celebration, several dinner parties. With each event I listed, the pattern became more obvious and more damning. At every major family gathering, I'd somehow ended up in a service role, not as a guest, but as unpaid help. And at these events, Judge Morrison continued, were you typically able to enjoy yourself as a guest, or were you working? The answer to that question was so obvious it was almost laughable. Working, always working. Dr. Whitfield's wife shook her head in disgust. That's appalling, absolutely appalling. Robert, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable throughout this interrogation, finally stepped forward. Now let's not blow this out of proportion. Family helps family. That's just how things work. No, Carmen said firmly. That's how exploitation works. Family celebrates family. Family supports family's success. Family doesn't lie to manipulate family into providing free professional services. The word lie hit the room like a thunderclap. Patricia's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. We never lied, she burst out, her voice shrill with desperation. We needed help, and Alex has always been so good at these things, so practical. You told her your cleaning service canceled, Carmen said coldly. That was a lie. You told her it was an emergency. That was a lie. You told her family helps family while simultaneously excluding her from the family celebration. That was manipulation wrapped in lies. The silence that followed was deafening. Every guest in that foyer was staring at Patricia with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to outright anger. The elegant anniversary party she'd planned so carefully had become a public trial, and the verdict was not in her favor. I stood in the center of it all, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: vindication. Not the angry, bitter kind that comes from being proven right about something terrible, but the quiet, powerful kind that comes from finally being seen clearly. These people, these successful, influential members of Springfield's elite, were seeing Patricia's treatment of me for what it really was. And they were appalled. Judge Morrison cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making important pronouncements. Mrs. Patterson, I think you owe your daughter-in-law an apology, a significant one. An apology? Patricia's voice cracked on the words. A public apology, Dr. Whitfield added firmly, for the deception, for the exploitation, and for the disrespect shown to a fellow businesswoman and member of this community. I watched Patricia's face cycle through emotions: rage, humiliation, desperation, and finally, defeat. The social position she'd worked so hard to build was crumbling around her, and everyone in the room knew it. But I didn't want her apology. I didn't want her humiliation or her desperate attempts to salvage the situation. What I wanted was something much simpler and much more powerful. I wanted my life back. I held up my hand before Patricia could attempt whatever apology Judge Morrison was demanding. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes fixed on me as I stepped forward into the center of the circle that had formed around us. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not on the periphery, not in service to others, but at the center of my own story. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the foyer, "I don't need an apology. What I need is clarity about what happens next." Patricia blinked at me, confusion replacing the panic in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I continued, feeling strength flow through me with each word, "that this evening has clarified some things for me, about this family, about my marriage, about who I am and who I'm going to be moving forward." Jordan reached for my arm, his touch tentative and uncertain. "Alex, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. I've spent 3 years having private discussions that led nowhere. I've spent 3 years being practical and accommodating and understanding. I think it's time for some public clarity. Carmen moved to stand beside me, a gesture of solidarity that meant more than she probably knew. "Alexandra, whatever you need to say, you have my support." Dr. Whitfield nodded approvingly. "And mine. What we've witnessed here tonight is completely unacceptable. The validation from people who barely knew me, but recognized my worth based on my professional accomplishments felt like armor." I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at Patricia, then at Robert, then at Michelle and Kevin, and finally at Jordan. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady and clear. "First, I want everyone in this room to understand exactly what transpired today. Patricia contacted me yesterday evening and told me that the cleaning service for tonight's party had canceled at the last minute. She said it was a family emergency and asked if I could help with some final preparations." I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "What actually happened was that I spent 12 hours today, 12 hours, doing comprehensive housework for this event. I scrubbed floors, cleaned windows, polished silver, hand-dried crystal, organized closets, and performed every other task you would normally pay a professional cleaning service to handle." Judge Morrison's wife made a sound of disgust. 12 hours? 12 hours, I confirmed. And when I was finished, I was told that tonight's celebration was intimate and that there wasn't space for me. I was dismissed so that I could go home and get ready for an event I wasn't invited to attend. The murmurs of outrage from the crowd were audible now. Someone near the back said, "That's unconscionable." Another voice added, "Absolutely shameful." Patricia tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. "But here's the thing that really matters," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I own Elite Home Solutions. I employ 63 people. I could have had this entire house professionally cleaned by a crew of 6 people in under 3 hours. Instead, I spent my Saturday on my hands and knees scrubbing floors because I was manipulated into believing it was necessary." Robert attempted to interrupt. "Now, Alexandra, I think you're being a bit dramatic." "Am I?" I turned to face him directly. "Robert, your wife lied to me about a cleaning service canceling. She manipulated me into providing free labor worth several $1,000s. She then excluded me from the event I'd spent all day preparing for. Which part of that do you consider dramatic?" The silence that followed was profound. Robert's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For a man who prided himself on his business acumen, He seemed to finally understand the professional implications of what his wife had done. Carmen stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd dealt with similar situations in the business world. What Patricia did today wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially actionable. If Alexandra chose to pursue it, she could file charges for fraud, theft of services, and professional defamation. Defamation? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. You deliberately misrepresented the circumstances to manipulate a business owner into providing free services, Carmen explained coolly. You damaged her professional standing by positioning her as household help, rather than the CEO she actually is. In front of influential members of the community, no less. Yes, that could absolutely constitute defamation. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Ms. Rodriguez is correct. The deception about the cleaning service alone could constitute fraud. And the professional implications are significant. I watched the color drain from Patricia's face as she realized the legal ramifications of her actions. But I wasn't interested in pursuing legal action. I was interested in something much more valuable, my freedom. However, I said, drawing everyone's attention back to me, I'm not interested in lawsuits or legal action. What I'm interested in is making sure this never happens again. Jordan looked relieved. Of course it won't happen again. We'll make sure. Jordan, I interrupted gently, you don't understand. I'm not talking about making sure your family doesn't exploit me again. I'm talking about making sure I'm never in a position to be exploited again. The distinction was subtle but crucial, and I could see the moment he understood what I was really saying. His face went pale, and he took a step backward. Alex, what are you saying exactly? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision I'd been avoiding for months finally settling into place. I'm saying that this marriage isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time, and tonight has shown me exactly why. The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Michelle actually grabbed Kevin's arm for support, while Patricia looked like she might faint. Robert was staring at me with something that looked suspiciously like respect for the first time since I'd known him. You can't be serious, Jordan said, his voice strained. Over this? Over one misunderstanding? One misunderstanding? I repeated, feeling a familiar anger rising in my chest. Jordan, this isn't one misunderstanding. This is 3 years of being systematically diminished and disrespected by your family while you stood by and let it happen. Carmen placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. Alexandra, you don't have to justify your decisions to anyone here. She was right, but I wanted to say this. I needed to say this. For 3 years, I'd swallowed my frustrations and doubts, convincing myself that I was being too sensitive or too demanding. Tonight had shown me that my instincts had been correct all along. Jordan, I said, turning to face my husband directly, in 3 years of marriage, how many times have you introduced me as the owner of Elite Home Solutions? He blinked, clearly trying to remember. I didn't really know that you owned the company. How many times have you asked about my business challenges or celebrated my professional successes? Alex, you never really talked about work stuff in detail. How many times have you stood up to your family when they treated me like hired help? That question hung in the air unanswered because we both knew the answer was never. Not once in 3 years had Jordan defended me or challenged his family's treatment of me. He'd stood by silently while I was systematically relegated to a service role in every family gathering. Dr. Whitfield cleared his throat. Ms. Martinez, if I may say so, you deserve much better than this. Thank you, I said simply. I'm finally starting to believe that myself. Margaret Whitfield stepped forward, her voice warm with genuine concern. Dear, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Because if you need anything at all... the kindness from virtual strangers was overwhelming. These people, who had known me only as Jordan's quiet wife until 30 minutes ago, were offering more support than I'd received from my husband's family in 3 years. "I have my own apartment," I said. "I never gave up my lease when Jordan and I got married. I suppose some part of me always knew I might need it." Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and desperate. "Alexandra, surely we can work this out. Family doesn't give up on family." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent 3 years making me feel small and invisible while benefiting from my labor and my silence. "Patricia, we were never family. I was never your daughter-in-law in any way that mattered. I was a resource to be managed and utilized." "That's not true, isn't it?" I interrupted. "When did you last ask about my hopes or dreams? When did you last show genuine interest in my life outside of what I could do for you? When did you last treat me like a person instead of a convenience?" The questions echoed through the silent foyer, unanswerable because they exposed the fundamental truth of our relationship. I had been useful to them, not valued by them. Jordan was staring at me like I was a stranger, which, in many ways, I was. The woman he'd married had been so eager to fit into his family that she'd been willing to make herself smaller to accommodate their comfort. The woman standing in front of him now had remembered who she was before she'd tried to become who they wanted. "Alex," he said quietly, "I love you." The words should have meant something. 3 years ago, they would have meant everything. But now they felt hollow, lacking the foundation of respect and understanding that real love required. "Jordan," I replied gently, "you love the version of me that was convenient for your family. You love the woman who cleaned your parents' house without complaint and never demanded to be treated as an equal. But you don't love me, the real me, because you never bothered to actually know me." Carmen squeezed my shoulder supportively. "Alexandra, you're one of the strongest women I know. Whatever you decide to do next, I know you'll succeed." Her confidence in me was like a lifeline. For years, I'd been starved of professional recognition within my personal life. Having someone who understood my capabilities affirm my strength felt revolutionary. "Actually," I said, an idea crystallizing as I spoke, "there is something I'd like to discuss with you, Carmen. A business opportunity I've been considering." "Oh?" Her eyebrows rose with interest. "I've been thinking about expanding Elite Home Solutions into event management and luxury hospitality services. Tonight has shown me there's definitely a market for ensuring that successful people are treated with the respect they deserve, rather than being exploited by family members." The implication was clear, and several people in the crowd chuckled appreciatively. Patricia looked mortified, but I wasn't finished. "I'm thinking we could offer comprehensive services for people who want to host elegant events without having to worry about finding reliable help. Professional staff who are properly compensated, fully insured, and trained to maintain the highest standards of discretion and service." Carmen's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that came from recognizing a brilliant business opportunity. "That's an excellent idea. The market for luxury event services is definitely underserved in this region. Plus," I continued, warming to the theme, "we could offer consultation services for families who want to ensure they're treating their relatives appropriately. You know, helping them understand the difference between asking for help and engaging in exploitation." The dig was subtle but unmistakable. Several guests were now openly smiling, clearly enjoying the way I was turning the evening's humiliation into a business opportunity. Judge Morrison spoke up, his voice approving. "Ms. Martinez, I think you'll find there's significant demand for those services among the professional community. Integrity in business relationships is essential." "Absolutely," Dr. Whitfield agreed. "And frankly, after what we've witnessed tonight, I think a lot of people would be very interested in working with someone who maintains such high professional standards." I felt a rush of excitement that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with possibility. This conversation was giving me ideas I hadn't considered before, ways to expand my business that could be both profitable and personally satisfying. Patricia, who had been standing frozen during this entire exchange, suddenly burst out, "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like I committed some terrible crime when all I did was ask for help from family." The room went silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Instead of shock or confusion, there was a collective sense of judgment. Patricia had just proved, in front of everyone, that she still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. Margaret Whitfield shook her head in disgust. "Mrs. Patterson, what you did was lie to manipulate someone into providing thousands of dollars worth of free professional services. The fact that you're related by marriage doesn't make it acceptable." "It makes it worse," Judge Morrison added sternly. "Family members should be the last people to exploit each other, not the first." Robert, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Patricia, I think you owe Alexandra a sincere apology." "I'm not apologizing for asking family for help," Patricia snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "Then you're not the woman I thought I married," Robert said quietly, and the disappointment in his voice was unmistakable. The crack in their united front was telling. Even Robert, who had enabled Patricia's behavior for years, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. Michelle, who had been silent through most of this confrontation, suddenly stepped forward. "Mom, just apologize. Please, this is embarrassing." "Embarrassing?" Patricia whirled on her daughter. "What's embarrassing is having our private family business discussed in front of guests." "What's embarrassing," Michelle replied with more backbone than I'd ever seen her display, "is finding out that you lied to Alex and made her work like a servant all day. That's what's embarrassing." Even Kevin nodded reluctantly. "Mom, this doesn't look good. For any of us." I watched this family fracture in real time, their carefully maintained facade of perfection crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. But I felt no satisfaction in their discomfort. What I felt was freedom. "You know what?" I said, addressing the room at large. "I think I've said everything I need to say here. Carmen, would you like to continue our business discussion somewhere else? I know a lovely wine bar downtown that would be perfect for brainstorming." Carmen's smile was brilliant. "I'd love to, and I think several other people here might be interested in learning more about your expansion plans." To my surprise, Dr. Whitfield and his wife both nodded enthusiastically. Judge Morrison looked intrigued as well. In the span of one evening, I'd gone from being the invisible daughter-in-law to being the center of a potential business networking opportunity. "Alexandra," Jordan said desperately, "please don't leave like this. Can't we talk about this tomorrow? When we've both had time to process everything?" I looked at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, with something approaching sympathy. He wasn't a bad person, just a weak one. He'd allowed his family to diminish me because it was easier than standing up to them. And now he was facing the consequences of that choice. "Jordan," I said gently, "there's nothing left to process. This marriage was over the moment you chose your family's comfort over my dignity. Tonight just made it official." I pulled off my wedding ring, the ring I'd worn while scrubbing his mother's floors earlier that day, and placed it on the marble table next to the foyer's flower arrangement. "I'll have my attorney contact you about the divorce proceedings," I said matter-of-factly. "I assume you'll want to handle this as amicably as possible." Jordan stared at the ring like it was a venomous snake. "Alex, please." "Goodbye?" "Jordan," I said firmly, "I hope you find someone who's satisfied with being useful instead of valued." I turned to Carmen and the other guests who had gathered around us. "Shall we? I have some very exciting business ideas I'd love to discuss." As we moved toward the front door, I heard Patricia's voice behind us, shrill and desperate. "This is insane. She's throwing away her marriage over housework. I paused at the threshold and looked back one last time. No, Patricia. I'm reclaiming my life from people who mistook my kindness for weakness. And with that, I walked out of the Patterson family mansion for the last time, surrounded by people who saw my worth instead of my utility. The cool evening air felt like freedom on my skin, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Not Jordan's wife, not Patricia's daughter-in-law, just Alexandra Martinez, successful businesswoman and architect of her own destiny. As we walked toward our cars, Carmen linked her arm through mine. You know, she said conversationally, I think this might be the beginning of a very beautiful partnership. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I think you might be right. Behind us, the sounds of the party continued, but it no longer had anything to do with me. I was done being the supporting character in someone else's story. It was time to write my own. The wine bar Carmen had suggested turned out to be an upscale establishment called Meridian, tucked into the historic district of downtown Springfield. As we settled into a corner booth with our small group, Carmen, Dr. and Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Morrison, and his wife and myself, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the electric energy of being around people who valued my mind. So, Carmen said, swirling her Cabernet thoughtfully, tell me more about this event management expansion you're considering, because frankly, after what I witnessed tonight, I think you're onto something revolutionary. I took a sip of my wine, gathering my thoughts. The business idea had crystallized during our confrontation at the mansion, born from the humiliation I'd endured but shaped by the professional respect I'd finally received. The concept is comprehensive luxury event services with an emphasis on dignity and professional standards. Not just cleaning and setup, but full-service event management that ensures everyone involved is treated appropriately. Dr. Whitfield leaned forward with interest. You mean like corporate events? Medical conferences? Corporate events certainly, but also private celebrations, weddings, anniversaries, milestone birthdays. The kind of events where family dynamics can get complicated and people might be tempted to exploit relatives instead of hiring professionals. Judge Morrison's wife, Helen, made a sound of understanding. Oh, that's brilliant. You're creating a service that protects people from being taken advantage of by their own families. Exactly, I said, feeling excitement build as I articulated the vision. Think about it. How many women do you know who end up doing all the work for family gatherings? How many successful people find themselves relegated to service roles during their own celebrations because it's easier than hiring help? Carmen's eyes were practically glowing. This could be huge, Alexandra. You're not just offering event planning. You're offering protection from family exploitation. Margaret Whitfield nodded emphatically. I cannot tell you how many dinner parties I've attended where the hostess spends the entire evening in the kitchen while her guests enjoy themselves. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the liability issues alone, Judge Morrison added, his legal mind clearly working. When family members provide unpaid services, there's no insurance coverage, no professional standards, no recourse if something goes wrong. You'd be offering peace of mind along with expertise. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, typing rapidly as ideas flowed. We could offer different service levels. Basic would be full professional staffing so no family member has to work during their own event. Premium would include coordination to ensure family dynamics don't interfere with the celebration. And elite would be comprehensive relationship management, essentially ensuring that all interactions remain respectful and appropriate. Relationship management, Carmen repeated slowly. That's the key differentiator. You're not just managing events, you're managing family politics. The conversation continued for over an hour, with each person contributing insights from their own professional experience. Dr. Whitfield talked about medical conferences where family-owned businesses struggled with boundary issues. Judge Morrison shared stories about estate disputes that stemmed from years of unequal family contributions. Helen and Margaret both had extensive experience with charity galas and social events, where volunteer coordination often devolved into exploitation. By the time we'd finished our second round of drinks, I had pages of notes and a clear vision for what would become Elite Life Management, a subsidiary of Elite Home Solutions focused on high-end event services and family dynamic consultation. "I want to be your first client," Margaret announced suddenly. "My daughter's wedding is in 6 months, and after tonight, I realize I've been unconsciously planning to have my sister handle most of the coordination because she's good at that sort of thing. But she's also a full-time teacher with 2 young children. It's completely unfair." "I'd be honored," I said, meaning it. "And that gives us a perfect timeline to develop the service protocols." Carmen raised her glass. "To elite life management, and to showing the world that professionalism and respect aren't too much to ask for even from family." We toasted, and I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: pure professional joy. The thrill of building something new, of solving problems that mattered, of using my skills to make a real difference in people's lives. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jordan. "Alex, please come home so we can talk about this. Mom feels terrible and wants to apologize properly." I showed the message to Carmen, who snorted. "Let me guess. Now that there have been social consequences, suddenly they want to make things right." "It's classic crisis management," Judge Morrison observed. "Damage control after the fact." I typed back a simple response. "I meant what I said tonight. My attorney will contact you next week." Then I turned off my phone and slipped it back into my purse. "You know," Dr. Whitfield said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about what happened tonight, and I keep coming back to one thing. How did they not know? How did your husband's family not know about your success?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. I think they didn't want to know. Acknowledging my professional success would have complicated their perception of me as the helpful daughter-in-law. It was more convenient to see me as someone with a flexible schedule who was available for family obligations. Helen shook her head. "But you've been featured in magazines, won awards. Surely they saw those things." "I tried to share them," I admitted. But there was always something more important happening in their world. Michelle's latest audition, Kevin's newest business venture, some crisis that needed immediate attention. My achievements became background noise. Carmen's expression grew fierce. "That's not accidental, Alexandra. That's a deliberate pattern of minimization. They trained you to believe your successes weren't worth celebrating." The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. They had trained me. Through years of subtle dismissals and topic changes, they'd conditioned me to downplay my own achievements, to present myself as less successful than I actually was to avoid making them uncomfortable. "My God," I whispered. "They made me complicit in my own diminishment." "But you broke the pattern tonight," Margaret said firmly. "You stood up for yourself and demanded to be seen for who you really are." "Speaking of which," Carmen said, pulling out her own phone, "I hope you don't mind, but I've been documenting this evening on social media. Nothing invasive, just some posts about the importance of supporting women entrepreneurs and treating family members with professional respect." She showed me her phone screen, where she'd shared a series of posts about the evening's events. The responses were already pouring in, dozens of comments from other business owners sharing their own stories of family exploitation and professional dismissal. "Carmen Rodriguez here with thoughts on tonight's revelation," one post read. "Met an incredible entrepreneur who's been hiding her success for years to accommodate family members who preferred her diminished. Time to normalize celebrating our achievements regardless of who finds them inconvenient." The comments were extraordinary. Woman after woman sharing stories of being asked to provide free professional services for family events, of having their expertise dismissed or minimized, of being expected to work at gatherings where they should have been honored guests. This is happening everywhere, I said, scrolling through the responses. It's not just me. Of course it's not just you, Helen said passionately. Women are conditioned to be helpful, to put others' comfort before their own dignity. But what you did tonight, walking away from people who exploited that conditioning, that's revolutionary. Judge Morrison was reading over my shoulder, his expression growing more serious with each comment. Alexandra, you might want to consider writing about this experience. There's clearly a widespread problem here that people need to understand. Actually, I said, an idea forming, what if Elite Life Management offered more than just event services? What if we also provided education and consultation about healthy family dynamics? Workshops for families who want to celebrate members' success without exploitation? Carmen's eyes lit up. Now you're thinking like the visionary you are. You could literally change how families interact around professional achievement. The conversation continued until well past midnight, with each of us contributing ideas and insights that would eventually form the foundation of a business that went far beyond what I'd originally envisioned. By the time we finally said our goodbyes, I had a business plan, 3 committed clients, and a partnership agreement in principle with Carmen. As I drove home to my apartment, not the home I'd shared with Jordan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, undiluted excitement about the future. Not anxiety about what others expected of me. Not worry about whether I was being accommodating enough. Just genuine enthusiasm for what I was going to build next. My phone had been buzzing with messages throughout the evening. Jordan had sent 17 texts, each one more desperate than the last. Patricia had left 3 voicemails, progressing from indignant to pleading. Even Michelle had reached out, asking if we could talk like adults about the situation. I deleted them all without responding. The next morning, I woke up in my own space, surrounded by my own things, and made a pot of coffee in peaceful silence. No one was going to call with urgent family obligations. No one was going to drop by with requests disguised as invitations. No one was going to minimize my achievements or expect me to make myself smaller for their comfort. I opened my laptop and began drafting a formal business plan for Elite Life Management. The service would launch with 3 core offerings: dignified, event management, family dynamic consultation, and professional respect training. Each service would be designed to ensure that successful people could celebrate their achievements without being exploited by family members who confused love with labor. The phone rang around 10 o'clock. Unknown number, but I recognized the Y. Area code as local. Against my better judgment, I answered, Alexandra, this is Robert Patterson, Jordan's father. I hadn't expected to hear from him directly. Robert, I said neutrally, I wanted to call and apologize for last night. What Patricia did was inexcusable, and I should have stopped it. The apology was more than I'd received from anyone else in the family, but it felt too little. Too late. I appreciate you saying that, Robert. I also wanted you to know that I've done some research into your company. Elite Home Solutions is impressive. Very impressive. I had no idea we had such an accomplished businesswoman in the family. Past tense. Had. The family I'd been excluded from was suddenly eager to claim me now that my professional success was public knowledge. Thank you, I said simply. Alexandra, is there any chance you might reconsider the divorce? Patricia has learned her lesson, and I think we could all do better moving forward. The question hung in the air between us. Was there a chance? Could 3 years of systematic diminishment be overcome by 1 evening of forced acknowledgement? Robert, I said carefully, the problem wasn't just last night. The problem was 3 years of being treated as less important than I actually am. 3 years of having my achievements dismissed or ignored. 3 years of being valued for my usefulness rather than my worth. I understand that now. Do you? I interrupted gently. Because if you really understood, you would know that calling to ask me to reconsider is just another form of the same behavior. You're asking me to accommodate the family's comfort rather than demanding that they earn back my respect. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Even Robert, who seemed to genuinely understand that something wrong had occurred, still couldn't grasp the fundamental issue. They wanted me to fix the situation by being forgiving rather than doing the work to deserve forgiveness. I see, he said finally. I hope you do, I replied. Because if your family ever wants to have a relationship with me again, they're going to have to approach it very differently. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment, processing the conversation. The fact that Robert had called was significant. It meant the family was beginning to understand that there would be real consequences for their behavior. But his approach proved that they still didn't understand the depth of the change required. I returned to my business plan, channeling my frustration into productive energy. By noon, I had a comprehensive outline for elite life management, complete with service descriptions, pricing structures, and marketing strategies. I'd also begun drafting a blog post about my experience, tentatively titled, "When Family Mistakes Your Love for Labor." The post would be the first in a series about professional women who'd been exploited by family members and how to recognize and address these patterns. It would become the foundation for the educational component of elite life management, providing resources for both victims of family exploitation and families who wanted to do better. Around 2 o'clock, Carmen called with news that would change everything. Alexandra, you're not going to believe this. I've been getting calls all morning from people who saw my social media posts about last night. 3 different women want to hire us for upcoming events, and 2 others want to book consultation sessions about family boundary setting. Seriously? Seriously. And that's not even the best part. I just got off the phone with Rachel Morrison, Judge Morrison's daughter. She's a producer for Channel 7 News, and she wants to interview you about family exploitation of professional women. Apparently, the story has really struck a nerve in the community. A television interview. 3 months ago, the idea would have terrified me. Not because I wasn't qualified to speak about business or family dynamics, but because I'd been conditioned to believe that drawing attention to myself was inappropriate. The old Alexandra would have deflected, suggested someone else, found a way to minimize her own expertise. The new Alexandra was different. Set it up, I said firmly. It's time people understood that this behavior has consequences. I was hoping you'd say that, Carmen laughed, because I may have already tentatively scheduled it for tomorrow afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my divorce from Jordan was just the beginning. I was divorcing an entire way of being, an entire set of expectations about how successful women should behave to keep others comfortable. The woman who had scrubbed floors the day before was gone forever. In her place stood someone who refused to be diminished, someone who demanded respect as a condition of relationship, someone who understood that true love never asks you to make yourself smaller. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what that woman would accomplish next. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming conference room of Elite Life Management's new offices, looking out at the Springfield skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular, but what filled me with pride wasn't the expensive real estate. It was the team of 12 professionals seated around the mahogany table, all of them experts in their fields, all of them committed to changing how families interact around success and celebration. The Channel 7 interview had been a watershed moment. Within hours of it airing, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Women from across the region shared their stories of being exploited by family members who mistook their kindness for servitude. But more importantly, families began reaching out, asking for help in creating healthier dynamics around professional achievement and celebration planning. The Henderson wedding was a complete success, reported Sarah Chen, my new director of family dynamic consultation. The bride's mother initially wanted her sister to handle all the floral arrangements because she has such a good eye. But when we explained that her sister is a professional florist who deserves to be paid for her expertise, the family immediately hired her properly. Everyone felt respected, and the arrangements were stunning. Michael Torres, our events coordinator, nodded approvingly. We're seeing this pattern across all our clients. Once families understand the difference between asking for help and expecting free professional services, they make better choices. The Phillips anniversary celebration went off without a single family member working. They all got to enjoy their own party. I smiled, remembering my own experience with anniversary parties. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. What about the corporate events division? Booming, Carmen reported from her seat at the head of the table. She'd officially joined. As my business partner 2 months earlier, and her expertise in scaling service businesses had been invaluable. The medical conference we handled last week generated 3 new contracts. Corporate clients love that we guarantee professional boundaries. No one's assistant gets stuck playing cocktail waitress. No junior partners end up running errands for senior staff. The growth had been exponential. What started as an idea born from humiliation had become a multi-million-dollar business addressing a problem nobody had acknowledged existed. We weren't just planning events. We were revolutionizing how successful people protected their dignity during celebrations. Dr. Whitfield had become one of our most vocal advocates, referring colleagues who needed help navigating family expectations around medical practice celebrations. Judge Morrison had connected us with the legal community, where we'd discovered an entire subset of lawyers who'd been volunteering their services for family legal matters, instead of maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. The blog engagement numbers are incredible, added Jessica Rodriguez, our communications director. The When Family Mistakes Your Love for Labor series has been shared over 50,000 times. We're getting interview requests from national publications. The blog had evolved into something I'd never expected, a platform for professional women to share their stories and strategies for maintaining dignity within family relationships. Each week brought new submissions from doctors who'd been expected to provide free medical advice at family gatherings, accountants who'd been pressured to handle relatives' taxes without compensation, lawyers who'd been guilted into free legal work for extended family. Speaking of interviews, Carmen said with a grin, tell them about the book deal. I felt a familiar flutter of excitement. Hartwell Publishing wants to turn the blog series into a book, Reclaiming Your Worth, a professional woman's guide to family boundaries. They're offering a 6-figure advance. The room erupted in applause, and I felt the same rush of validation I'd experienced that night at Meridian. These people, my team, my colleagues, my partners, celebrated my success without trying to diminish it or redirect attention elsewhere. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a familiar name, Jordan. We'd been divorced for 4 months now, and his attempts at communication had dwindled to occasional messages that I usually ignored. This one was different. Saw the news about your book deal in the Springfield Gazette. Congratulations. You deserve all this success. For a moment, I considered responding. The message seemed genuine, lacking the desperation of his earlier attempts at reconciliation. But then I deleted it without replying. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way. There's one more thing, Sarah said, pulling my attention back to the meeting. We've received an unusual request. A potential client wants us to help her navigate a situation with her in-laws who've been exploiting her professional skills. I raised an eyebrow. That's not unusual anymore. That's literally half our business. This one's different. The woman is a successful tech entrepreneur, and her mother-in-law has been volunteering her services for charity events without asking permission. When she tried to establish boundaries, the family accused her of being selfish and ungrateful. The situation sounded painfully familiar. What makes this case special? Sarah's smile was mischievous. The potential client's name is Michelle Patterson. The room fell silent. Michelle, Jordan's sister. The same Michelle who'd stood by while I'd been relegated to servant status at family gatherings, who'd made jokes about my saintly willingness to do work she couldn't be bothered with. She specifically requested you, Sarah continued. Said she's learned a lot from watching how badly her family handled things with you, and she needs help establishing boundaries before her wedding next year. I sat back in my chair, processing this unexpected development. Michelle wanting my help was the ultimate irony. The golden child of the Patterson family seeking guidance from the daughter-in-law they'd dismissed and exploited. What did you tell her? That I'd present the request to you, but that our waiting list for new clients is currently 4 months long. Carmen leaned forward with interest. This could be a fascinating case study, Alexandra. The family member who witnessed exploitation seeking help to avoid repeating the pattern. Part of me wanted to reject the request outright. The petty satisfaction of turning away someone who'd benefited from my humiliation was tempting. But the larger part of me, the part that had built this business around the principle of dignity for all, recognized an opportunity. Schedule a consultation, I decided. Same rates, same timeline as any other client. If Michelle Patterson wants help establishing boundaries with her family, she can receive the same professional service we provide everyone else. Michael looked surprised. You're willing to work with your former sister-in-law? I'm willing to work with any client who's committed to creating healthier family dynamics, I corrected. Personal history doesn't disqualify someone from deserving respect and professional boundaries. The meeting concluded with updates on upcoming events and new service offerings. As my team filed out, chatting excitedly about projects and possibilities, I remained at the conference table, looking out at the city that had become the launching pad for something much larger than I'd ever imagined. My assistant knocked on the open door. Ms. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. Says it's regarding the Patterson consultation. I expected to see Michelle walk through the door, but instead, a familiar figure appeared. Patricia. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual commanding presence diminished by something that might have been humility. Hello, Alexandra. Patricia. I gestured to a chair across from my desk. Please, sit. She settled herself carefully, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild awaiting judgment. I imagine you're surprised to see me. I am, I admitted. Michelle was the one who requested the consultation. She was, but I asked to come instead, to talk to you before you decide whether to help her. I waited, curious about where this conversation would lead. I owe you an apology, Patricia said finally. A real one, not the defensive nonsense. I spouted that night at the party. What I did to you was inexcusable. I lied to you, exploited your kindness, and treated you like hired help when you deserved to be honored as family. The words were exactly what I'd wanted to hear 6 months ago. Now they felt like a closing statement rather than an opening for reconciliation. Thank you for saying that, I replied genuinely. I appreciate you acknowledging what happened. I've been watching what you've built here, Patricia continued, gesturing around the elegant office. Reading about your success, seeing how you've helped other families avoid the mistakes we made. You were extraordinary all along, and I was too threatened by your accomplishments to see it. Threatened. That was the first honest thing Patricia had ever said about our relationship. Why were you threatened? Patricia looked down at her hands. Because you were everything I'd given up to be Robert's wife. Successful, independent, building something of your own. I spent 40 years defining myself through my husband's achievements and my children's potential. You were a reminder of the path I'd chosen not to take. The admission was more vulnerable than anything I'd ever heard from Patricia. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it in a way that felt both sad and familiar. So you diminished me to make yourself feel better about your choices. Yes, she said simply. And I'm sorry. I studied this woman who had caused me so much pain, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. Instead, I saw someone who'd finally faced the cost of her jealousy and found it too high to bear. Patricia, why are you here? What do you want from me? I want you to help Michelle, she said firmly. But more than that, I want you to know that what you've built here, this business that protects people from being treated the way I treated you, it matters. You're saving other families from becoming what we became. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Jordan knows he lost the best thing that ever happened to him. We all do. After she left, I sat in my office as the sun set over Springfield, thinking about journeys and transformations and the strange ways that pain could become purpose. In 6 months, I'd gone from scrubbing someone else's floors to owning a business that employed 63 people and helped families create more respectful dynamics. The woman who'd been manipulated into manual labor had become a nationally recognized expert on family exploitation. The daughter-in-law who'd been excluded from celebrations was now planning events where everyone felt valued and respected. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Carmen's voice was excited. Alexandra, you need to turn on Channel 7. They're doing a follow-up story about elite life management, and the response to their online poll is incredible. I switched on the television to see a graphic showing survey results. Should successful family members be expected to provide free professional services? 89% of respondents said no. The anchor was interviewing Dr. Whitfield, who was explaining how elite life management had helped him establish boundaries around providing free medical consultations at family gatherings. Everyone deserves to enjoy family celebrations without working, he said. And everyone deserves to have their professional expertise valued, especially by their own relatives. I smiled, remembering the terror I'd felt 6 months ago about appearing on television. Now, watching my work being validated and my message spreading, I felt only pride. The story concluded with information about my upcoming book and the expansion of elite life management into 3 additional cities. As the anchor signed off, she added, "Thanks to one woman's courage to demand respect, families across the region are learning to celebrate success without exploitation." I turned off the day television and looked around my office, my space, built with my vision, staffed by people who shared my values. Tomorrow, I would help Michelle Patterson establish boundaries with the same family that had exploited me. Next month, I would appear on a national morning show to discuss family dynamics and professional respect. Next year, my book would help women across the country recognize and address exploitation in their own families. The woman who'd been told she was practical had become revolutionary. The daughter-in-law who'd been dismissed had become indispensable to families who wanted to do better. And the best part? I'd never had to clean another floor unless I chose to. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.